fundamentals of image analysis and remote sensing. Geographic information systems. Well, lots of ways to talk about GIS. We all know that. Sometimes we'll just tell a newcomer what is GIS. They might ask us, and we tell them something. Well, it's smart maps, or it's computerized or digital maps. But if we want to know it a little bit more, we have to understand that that system is made up of different components. And that system includes, obviously, the software like ArcGIS Pro, data, maps that we make, analysis processes, apps or applications, people as well. Very important part that unfortunately a lot of people kind of gloss over. But notice on that graphic that we also have, as part of this data, we have data coming from satellites. Satellites are part of the system. And satellite or aerial imagery data is one part of that overall system. You know, sometimes these data, aerial imagery data, are simply what you see is what you get, right? Something like this, maybe this pictometry imagery on the right side. Raster imagery really collected and prepared for viewing. And in many ways, the normal NAPE aerial imagery is one of those things that is what you see is what you get. In other cases, however, the imagery may not look very impressive, like this stuff way over here on my left side now. May not look very impressive, but these are the data we're going to focus on today. These are the data that need analysis to unlock their secrets and tell us something of interest. Analyzing imagery. You know, traditionally, this field was known as remote sensing, satellite remote sensing, those sorts of things. But the concept of remote sensing is something that we all use absolutely every day. Real remote sensing is knowing or learning about something without touching it. So let's try a little experiment. Without touching it, look at your desk or this photo, let's say. Now answer these questions. Is the desk hard or soft? Now, no touching, remember. Smooth or rough? Is the pad of sticky notes in my source imagery photo on the right harder or softer than the desk? Higher or lower in elevation? Brighter or darker in color? I bet you probably got all of these right, even though you weren't able to touch that image that you were looking at, weren't able to see things that are on my desk, but your past experience with similar things allowed you to know a lot about these new things without touching or visiting them. In other words, you sensed their characteristics remotely. See, this is the concept that is absolutely fundamental to image analysis. We build past experiences in our computers, in GIS, let's say, using what's called training site data, points or areas with known characteristics. In other words, we visited a real place somewhere in the real world, recorded the location of that place, along with a description of what was found at that location. Sometimes that description is very, very detailed. In other cases, it's pretty simple, like my little example here. A point feature class with X and Y coordinate data and a very brief description. So if we look at this text file, we see the ID column or field, an X and a Y field. And if we look at those numbers, we all recognize that this data is recorded, or these data are recorded in latitude, longitude. And then we see that very brief description. Point 1 is a place that experienced a high severity burn, a wildfire. And point 2, somewhere nearby probably, experienced an unburned. It wasn't burned by that particular wildfire. Training site data, we have to always have a sufficient number of good training sites if we can expect good image analysis results. And with a sufficient number of good training sites, we can expect good image analysis results. Now, that sufficient number, what is the sufficient number? Well, that number depends upon the inherent variability of the thing we're trying to map, as well as the size of the project area. A larger project area, all other things being equal, a larger project area will require a larger number of training sites to make that into a sufficient number of training sites. And the number of other competing things found in the same area is also an important consideration. So if we have a lot of similar things out there on the landscape, target and non-target things, well, we're going to again have to have a larger number of training sites to then make it a sufficient number of training sites. Training site variability has to be considered. So sometimes under the lighting conditions in my office will be different, thereby making my desk look different. So my desk will look different under different or varying lighting conditions. Similarly, these things we are interested in, the target and non-target things, will look different across different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. Well, some of you may not know what the EMS, electromagnetic spectrum, really is, but I think you really do know what that is. A lot of us have looked through a prism. I have a prism on my desk that whenever I teach things about remote sensing, I use this, and we can take that prism and input on one side of that prism nice bright white light, natural light, let's say, and the prism breaks that light into its component parts. We will see the reds, the greens, and the blues. Those are different wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum. And in satellite imagery, we like to oftentimes they will capture that different parts of the EMS, the red, the green, and the blue, as well as other things outside the visible part. So here's our visible part right there. Things outside the visible part will also be recorded in different things that we call bands. So we'll have a red band, a green band, a blue band, as well as a near infrared and a shortwave infrared, and sometimes thermal infrared bands, and so on and so forth. That's how we deal with it digitally in the computer. So a leaf might be bright in one part of the EMS, let's say the near infrared band, while at the same time it appears dark in another part, let's say the red band. In other words, digitally, that leaf would have a high numeric value in the near infrared band and a low numeric value in the red band. There's more sources of variability that we need to consider as well when we're thinking about developing these training sites. The health of the plant will affect its brightness and darkness in the same bands of the EMS. A different species of plant may look different, sometimes only subtly different though, across the electromagnetic spectrum. Now this is due in some part to the plant's leaf area index, LAI. How broad is that leaf? So a big old oak leaf, let's say, has a high leaf area index in contrast to a blade of bluegrass, right? Much thinner leaf area index. And there's also some species specific characteristics, the amount of the cell structure of those plants, et cetera, et cetera. It goes, we can go on forever about those differences, but not in 30 minutes. Plants also look different across time. That's the phenology of plants. I think we're all familiar early in the spring, things around Idaho are pretty nice and green. And very early on, we will see a nice green flush on the hillsides. And oftentimes that is cheatgrass. And around May, we notice, hey, the hills are looking kind of purplish, almost burgundy-ish, right? As that cheatgrass is starting to walk through its phenology, its life phases, and actually moving towards senescence. It's more or less dying off. And then normally in around June, or certainly in July, it's all brown, cheatgrass especially. And it has gone dormant, it has dropped its seeds, it has died. Actually, it's an annual grass. So at different times of the year, the phenology of the plant will cause variability in those numeric signals that we're getting and recording in the satellite imagery or aerial imagery. Target versus non-target. So if our target, our thing, is cheatgrass and our non-target thing is crested wheatgrass, two grasses, we need to have lots of good training sites, because these targets are, number one, both plants, sharing many very similar characteristics across the EMS. So what's a good training site? Well, a training site has to be accurate. It has to be logically accurate. In other words, the thing we are mapping is really found at that X and Y location. And it has to be temporally accurate. In other words, the training site collection date needs to be the same, or at least pretty darn similar, to the date when the imagery we're going to be using was captured or acquired. Landsat imagery, Sentinel-2 imagery, whatever it happens to be. We also need to make sure that we have, ideally, homogeneous pixels. So ideally, then, the thing we are mapping will fill each pixel at each training site. Our training site may be a vector point feature, but understand that in the analysis process, that point feature is going to be converted into a raster pixel of the same size as the image that, or imagery that we're using to analyze that same area. So if we are using Landsat satellite imagery that has 30 meter by 30 meter pixels, a training site inside that pixel then becomes a 30 meter by 30 meter pixel. And what we want to do is, ideally, our training target, if we're saying that this pixel here, that training site point, is a cheatgrass training site, well, ideally, cheatgrass covers that pixel 100%. It's homogeneous in that pixel. Now, I suppose for some folks, the whole idea of working with raster pixels is a little bit new, and maybe some new jargon there. So a pixel is a picture element that is, all the time, it's always rectangular in shape. A raster layer contains many pixels, millions oftentimes, and all raster layers, as a result, are also rectangular in shape. Now, a pixel can be described by its resolution. It has a spatial resolution, as I already alluded to. Landsat 8 has 30 meter pixels. There's also a spectral resolution. That is what portion of the electromagnetic spectrum is being recorded. We have a red band, a green band, a blue band. Well, what is the actual wavelength of that, of each of those bands that are being recorded by Landsat? And we can also look at a pixel by its radiometric resolution, aka its pixel depth or data type. Landsat 5 used a pixel depth of where the values for each pixel varied from between 0 and 255. Other satellite imagery gives us values of 0 to 32,000, et cetera, et cetera. You can see then that a greater radiometric resolution allows us to discern more subtle differences than we would with a coarser or simpler radiometric resolution. In other words, we can discern more subtle effects here and less subtle effects there. Mixels. Now, that's not a typo. It's a term that we use not too often in a real professional context, but we talk about mixels. Mixels are mixed pixels. So when using Landsat data, that 30-meter spatial resolution, it may be really difficult to acquire homogeneous training sites. Finding a spot on the ground, even though cheatgrass is all over the place in the state of Idaho, finding a place where cheatgrass covers an entire pixel about 100 feet by 100 feet, like a carpet, is really hard. You know, you can't have bare ground showing anywhere if it's going to be homogeneous. You can't have a sagebrush plant that's no longer homogeneous. It's then a mixel or a mixed pixel. Are mixed pixels the end of the world as we know it? Did you know that that's pronounced TEOTWAWKI? I didn't know that just until the other day when I looked this up. No, it's not the end of the world to have mixed pixels. In fact, it's kind of the norm rather than the exception. And mixed pixels simply make remote sensing more challenging, let's say. I'm sure I would prefer it not to be the case. It would make life easier, but it is what it is, right? Mixed pixels are absolutely normal. Spectrally, oftentimes we can see inside a pixel and perform what's called sub-pixel extraction of target features. In fact, one of the projects that we just finished a little while ago was doing just that, extracting stock ponds, the location of relatively small stock ponds from Landsat imagery. And we had some pretty good success for that for our partners at the US Forest Service and the BLM. I'll tell you also about a little study we did, a case study we did on wildfire detection. So this was done a number of years ago, again with Landsat imagery. And we knew the exact overpass time. We looked it up. We actually coordinated with the USGS EROS data center to be sure that we knew the time when Landsat would be overpassing Pocatello, Idaho. And so we set up more or less a campfire, and we contained that campfire to 1 meter by 1 meter. We actually put barriers on it so it couldn't burn outside of that 1 meter by 1 meter square. And we just to make sure we were doing things right, we set up some thermal and infrared cameras to record the temperatures that the fire was burning at, and all this good. It was actually a really cool experiment that we ran. And then, of course, we had a nice clear sky. Landsat did pass over more or less right on time. You're not going to see it, of course, though. And then the next day, we were able to download that imagery, and we analyzed it. Now, here we have a pixel, Landsat pixel, that was 900 meters. I'm sorry, it was 30 meters by 30 meters. So one of our 1 meter by 1 meter fire cells, right? There's 900 of those. 900, that's where the number 900 came in a little bit ago. There was 900. So our fire was 900 times smaller than a pixel, but we detected it. We detected it clearly. In fact, our little wildfire campfire was obviously close to 2 pixels, obviously on the edge of a pixel, and actually 2 pixels lit up as having a fire occurring inside those. So that really shows us that we can see inside pixels. It's kind of a neat thing to understand about satellite remote sensing. Well, here we go. I've got a little, poll for you if you'd like to take it. Just go to pollev.com/KeithWeber652. And when you do that, you should see this poll. Do you want to learn something more about remote sensing? If you do, select a topic you're interested in. You can choose as many as you wish. You might say, no, thanks, my brain is already full, like this little fella on the right side here. Or maybe you're interested in learning more about these spectral signatures, maybe some more about classification tools, or how do we determine how good our our analysis is, classification accuracy, or some other topic that you might have. And if you have any ideas, just email those to us over here at the GIS Center, giscenter@isu.edu. And I'll give you a minute or so, a couple minutes to complete this poll. Okay, it looks like our poll is completed, 50-50 split between classification. Oh, no, that's okay. Classification tools, those are the big ones, classification tools and determining the accuracy of classification. So that's cool, very good to know, and we'll probably plan on doing some more of these things on remote sensing, image analysis in the future. So I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the next slide and let you know that there are lots of opportunities to learn more about remote sensing, get involved with remote sensing. One of those things, of course, is the NASA Develop program. NASA Develop is a capacity building program inside NASA Earth Sciences, Applied Sciences. And right now, the application period is open. We're accepting applications for participants, more or less like interns, for the spring term, starting up in January, actually. And we do remote sensing. It's all funded by NASA. It's a great opportunity, especially for early career professionals, for students. And so if you know someone who might be interested in NASA Develop, let them know about that. If you need some links from me about NASA Develop, just let me know. There are 12 NASA Develop nodes around the United States, and one of those nodes is right here at the GIS Center at ISU. It's simply called the NASA Idaho node. So with all of that, there's also my direct email. I will open the floor for any questions that you might have.